When a new black teacher walked into Milstone High, she only wanted to teach in peace. But by the end of her first week, her shirt would be ripped apart in front of hundreds of students, and her next move would shake the entire school to its core. Early autumn settled over Milstone High like a quiet bruise. The gray sky hung low above the cracked red brick walls, and the wind carried the faint smell of oil from the factories beyond the football field. Inside the front gate, hundreds of voices blended into a chaotic hum, laughter, arguments, sneakers squeaking on the tiles, a rap beat leaking from someone's headphones. It wasn't a place for silence, and yet, that was exactly what Alicia Johnson brought with her when she stepped onto the campus for the first time. She was 32, a black teacher from Atlanta who had spent years working in underfunded schools. Her posture was calm, shoulders back, hair tied neatly behind her head, a navy cardigan draped over a white blouse. As she crossed the courtyard, a small freshman brushed past and whispered, "Ma'am, you should be careful with Cole Whitmore." The boy disappeared before she could ask more, leaving the warning hanging in the cool air. Alicia stopped in front of a cracked window, catching her reflection, the same mix of steadiness and quiet doubt she always carried on the first day. She whispered to herself, "Noise never scared me. Silence does." Then she pushed open the door to Class 10B. The hallway swallowed her in its din. Inside the classroom, 30 students turned at once. Some stared with curiosity, some with mock amusement. The back row was occupied by 3 boys who didn't bother to hide their smirks. Cole sat in the middle, tall, blonde, wearing a red varsity jacket with his name stitched in gold. On his left lounged Tyler, a wiry boy with a small tattoo on his neck. On the right was Brett, heavy-eyed and restless, chewing gum as if daring someone to stop him. Alicia set her grade book on the lectern and smiled. "Good morning. I'm Ms. Johnson, your new teacher." For a heartbeat, the room held its breath. Then laughter rippled from the back. Cole leaned forward, voice dripping sarcasm. "Ms. Johnson, huh? Looks more like someone's auntie than a teacher." The class chuckled. Alicia didn't flinch. She wrote her name neatly on the board, her chalk stroke steady. "If respect was currency," she said, turning back to them, "some of you would be bankrupt." The laughter shifted, nervous this time. A few students even smiled. Maya, a petite girl near the window, covered her grin with her notebook. Jamal, tall and thin with oversized glasses, raised an eyebrow in quiet admiration. Cole, however, froze for a moment before forcing a smirk. His blue eyes hardened. He tore a page from his notebook, sketched something quickly, and tossed it onto her desk. It was a crude caricature, her curly hair exaggerated, her face drawn onto the body of a mouse. More laughter bubbled from the back. Alicia picked it up, studied it briefly, and said evenly, "That's creative. Maybe you should join the art club." The class laughed again, but this time the humor belonged to her. Cole's jaw flexed. He wasn't used to losing control of a room. For the next 15 minutes, the trio tried everything, fake coughing, mimicking her voice, soft music playing under the desk, but Alicia kept teaching, weaving questions into her lesson that pulled other students in, shifting the focus away from them. Every time she ignored an insult, her authority grew stronger. When the bell rang, chairs scraped back and the noise of the hallway returned like a flood. Alicia stacked her books, her hand trembling slightly before she steadied it against the desk. Outside, Cole lingered near the lockers, spinning his keys on a finger. As she passed, he called out just loud enough for the others to hear, "Hey, new lady. We've got our own way of welcoming teachers here." His grin was wide but his tone carried something colder. Tyler and Brett laughed beside him. Alicia met his eyes, her voice calm. "Then I'll look forward to learning your ways." She walked on, heels clicking against the linoleum, the echo sharp and deliberate. Behind her, Cole muttered, "She'll regret that." The laughter that followed was softer now, meaner. In the fading afternoon light, Alicia stepped out into the courtyard again, the wind tugging at the edges of her cardigan. The noise of the school faded behind her, but inside those walls, something had already been set in motion, a challenge, a promise, and the first ripple of a storm no one yet saw coming. By the next afternoon, the rumor had spread through every hallway of Milstone High. The new teacher stood up to Cole Whitmore. It passed from locker to locker, whispered in bathrooms, repeated in the cafeteria line. Some students were eager for drama, others quietly hoped it was true, that someone had finally told the Whitmore boy no. The lunch bell rang, and the building turned into a river of footsteps and laughter. The cafeteria glowed under harsh neon lights, the smell of fried food hanging heavy. The noise was constant, a pulse of youth and arrogance. Alicia Johnson stood at the door, tray in hand, scanning the sea of faces. Conversations paused as soon as she stepped in. She felt the silence crawl over the room like a shadow. Dozens of phones were already out, cameras discreetly raised. She knew they were watching, waiting. She walked with steady steps to an empty table near the window. Her cardigan was buttoned, her posture calm. She had faced tougher crowds before, but something in the air felt different today, anticipation sharpened into cruelty. At the center of the cafeteria, Cole sat at his usual table, his red varsity jacket bright under the lights. Tyler and Brett flanked him like loyal guards. He leaned back in his chair, grinning. "Well, look who joined us for lunch," he said, voice carrying across the room. Laughter rippled. Alicia didn't look up. "I'm here to eat, Cole. You should too." A few students snickered, but Cole's grin only widened. He whispered to Tyler, who grabbed his tray and started toward her. The noise faded as everyone watched. Alicia sensed it before it happened, the way silence gathers right before a storm. Tyler's tray tilted, and in one swift motion, ketchup, soda, and mashed potatoes splashed across her shoulder and hair. The cafeteria erupted in laughter. A red stain spread across her navy cardigan. Alicia froze for a second, breathing slowly. Her hands didn't tremble. She set her fork down, stood, and turned to face him. "Tyler," she said softly, "what do you think this proves?" The boy smirked, stepping back. "Just having fun, Ms. Johnson." Before she could respond, Brett appeared behind her, the grin on his face stretched too wide. He grabbed her cardigan by the collar and yanked hard. The tearing sound echoed through the cafeteria like a gunshot. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. The laughter, the whispers, even the clatter of trays, all vanished. The rip wasn't just fabric. It was an insult, a declaration that she didn't belong. Cole laughed first. "Ah, teacher gonna cry," he mocked. Alicia stood perfectly still, breath steady, eyes locked on Brett. Then, without a word, she moved. Her right hand clamped his wrist, her body pivoted, her hip turned, a clean, practiced throw. Brett hit the tile floor with a thud that silenced the entire room. He gasped, wind knocked out of him. Tyler lunged in panic, reaching for her arm, but Alicia shifted again, redirecting his movement, and sent him sprawling beside his friend. The cafeteria froze in disbelief. Cole shot to his feet, fury flashing in his eyes. He rushed toward her, but before his hand could reach her shoulder, Alicia stepped aside, trapped his wrist, and twisted gently but firmly until he dropped to one knee. The motion was precise, controlled, no rage, no excess. Her voice was low but clear enough for everyone to hear. "I didn't come here to fight. But if anyone tries to hurt me or another student, I will defend." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Then from one corner came a single clap, Maya, the quiet girl by the window. Another followed, and then another, until the entire cafeteria filled with applause. The roar of approval drowned out the humiliation that had started it. Cole's face flushed red as he stumbled back to his feet. No one laughed with him now. Even his friends avoided his gaze. Alicia adjusted the torn edge of her cardigan, brushed the stain from her sleeve, and sat back down, as if nothing had happened. Her hands moved with the same composure she had walked in with. Across the room, Cole stared at her, breath heavy, pride shattered. "Funny," he muttered, voice low but sharp, "but this isn't over." He grabbed his slice of pizza and bit into it, eyes still fixed on her. Around him, phones were raised, the faint sounds of recording apps clicking on. Maya and Jamal exchanged a look, half awe, half worry. The moment felt larger than the cafeteria itself, larger than the school. Alicia's calm had turned into legend before their eyes, but beneath that applause, a new threat was already being born. On dozens of screens, the footage was captured, the splash of ketchup, the rip of fabric, the perfect throw. By the time the lunch bell rang again, it was already spreading beyond Milstone High. Alicia gathered her tray, her face unreadable. The torn edge of her cardigan brushed against her wrist, a reminder that this victory, however righteous, would come at a cost. As she walked out, the cafeteria buzzed with whispers, phones glowing. Every eye followed her, not with laughter now, but with something else, fear, admiration, and the unspoken knowledge that they had just witnessed something no one would forget. In the corner, Cole watched her leave, his smile gone, replaced by a cold promise. The sound of his voice was almost a whisper. "Let's see how long she stays brave." The crowd's noise returned, louder than ever, but somewhere in it, the echo of that tear lingered, like a crack running through the very walls of Milstone High. That night, the noise of Milstone High followed Alicia home. Her small apartment sat above a laundromat, the hum of machines blending with the soft ticking of a wall clock. On the desk, her laptop glowed in the dim room, blue light painting her face as the notifications poured in. Someone had posted the video, Teacher vs. Cole Squad, and now it was everywhere. The clip had already hit 100,000 views before sunset. Students had filmed it from every angle, the ketchup splattering, the tear of her cardigan, the clean precision of her judo throw. The sound of the crowd cheering played on loop. The comments section scrolled endlessly, "Queen." Finally someone put Cole in his place. Then others followed like knives. "Fire her. Unprofessional. Violent woman shouldn't be near kids." Alicia stared at the screen, her reflection faint in the glass. She scrolled slowly, absorbing every word. Her hand moved to the torn edge of her cardigan lying folded beside her laptop. It still smelled faintly of ketchup and detergent. She rose and walked to the bathroom mirror. Under the harsh fluorescent light, she could still see a faint red stain on her sleeve, missed by the wash. Her reflection looked stronger than she felt. "I stood tall today," she whispered, her voice almost breaking, "but tonight, I'm shaking. Maybe that's what courage really feels like." The phone buzzed on the counter, a shrill sound cutting through the quiet. She answered. "Ms. Johnson," the voice of the principal sounded strained. "You need to come in tomorrow morning. The board's requesting an urgent meeting." Alicia nodded, her voice calm. "I'll be there." When the call ended, the silence returned heavier than before. She turned off the laptop, but the ghost of the video lingered in her mind, the laughter, the throw, the applause. The same act that had given her back her dignity was now being twisted into something else. The next morning, the school looked different. Conversations stopped when she passed. Whispers followed her through the hall. She could feel the shift, the admiration had turned into scrutiny. Phones pointed discreetly, recording her every step. The principal's office smelled of coffee and tension. Mr. Whitmore was already there, standing by the window in his tailored gray suit. His presence filled the room like a cold draft. On the desk lay a printed stack of screenshots from the video, frozen mid-motion, her hand gripping Cole's wrist. "Do you know what this looks like, Ms. Johnson?" His voice was sharp, polished, dangerous. "It looks like you humiliated my son in front of the entire school." Alicia stood straight, her tone steady. "I defended myself, sir. Your son and his friends attacked me." He turned, eyes narrowing. "Attacked? Teenagers playing around, that's all. But you, an adult, chose violence." The principal shifted uncomfortably in his chair but said nothing. The silence stretched. Whitmore's words cut deeper. You think this is a game? That video is viral now. Reporters are calling. Sponsors are watching. You've embarrassed this school, and my family. Alicia's hands remained at her sides, fingers curled but calm. Respect and safety aren't embarrassment, she said quietly. They're responsibilities. Whitmore gave a dry laugh, cold and hollow. You won't last here. She didn't answer. There was nothing more to say. She turned, opened the door, and walked out, her heels echoing down the corridor like a steady drumbeat. The moment she stepped into the hallway, students who had gathered outside scattered in silence. Some averted their eyes, others held up their phones pretending not to film. She passed them all without a glance, the faint smell of cafeteria grease drifting through the air. Outside, the autumn wind had turned sharp. She pulled her torn cardigan tighter around her shoulders and walked toward the parking lot, her steps deliberate, her back straight. From the office window, Mr. Whitmore watched her go, his reflection merging with the glass. He picked up his phone and spoke in a low voice to someone unseen. I want every clip, every post about her collected by morning. We'll show the world who she really is. The line crackled with quiet agreement. In her car, Alicia sat for a long moment before starting the engine. She looked at her hands resting on the steering wheel. They were steady now. The fear had burned away, replaced by something colder, resolve. The streetlights blurred as she drove into the night. Behind her, the walls of Milstone High loomed like silent witnesses, and somewhere in the glow of countless screens, the story of that torn cardigan was no longer hers to control. By Wednesday morning, Milstone High had turned into a rumor factory. The hallways buzzed with whispers that grew sharper with every retelling. Posters appeared overnight on locker doors and bulletin boards, Alicia's photo printed in black and white, the words, "Dangerous Teacher," stamped in red across the top. Some laughed as they passed, others tore them down, but by the next hour, new ones appeared again. It wasn't just gossip anymore. It was war. The video that started it all had been edited. In the new version, the camera angle was tighter, the lighting darker, and the sound replaced. A faint scream, Cole's voice spliced in, echoed just as Alicia pinned his wrist. The clip cut off before the applause, freezing on the image of her hand on his shoulder. To anyone watching without context, it looked violent. Within hours, the fake video hit social media. Headlines followed, Teacher assaults student, Milstone High scandal. Alicia walked through the corridor that morning to find students parting silently as she passed. Phones lowered, then lifted again once her back turned. The air felt heavy with judgment. Maya ran up, clutching her phone, eyes wide. They changed it, Ms. Johnson. They added a scream. Look. She played the clip, the sound of a boy crying out in fear. Alicia watched, her jaw tightening but her voice calm. Who posted it? Jamal appeared behind Maya, face tight with anger. An anonymous account. I traced the upload time. It came from inside the school network. His voice broke slightly. We can prove it's fake, but nobody's listening. Alicia placed a hand on his shoulder. Then we keep our proof safe. The truth doesn't vanish because people refuse to see it. That afternoon, she sat alone in the teacher's lounge. Conversation stopped when she entered. The coffee machine hissed in the background. Two teachers by the window lowered their voices but not enough. She brought it on herself, one murmured. A woman like that shouldn't provoke students. Alicia stared at the blank form in front of her, a resignation letter. Her pen hovered above the paper. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. She could walk away. It would be easy. She had done her best. But the memory of Maya's frightened face, of Jamal's shaking hands holding the phone, anchored her. Her phone rang. Her mother's voice came through, gentle but firm. You sound tired, baby. Alicia exhaled. I am, Mom. They're twisting everything. Every good thing I've done, they're turning it into poison. Then don't let them write your story, her mother said softly. They can edit videos, but they can't edit truth. Alicia closed her eyes. The words sank in like light cutting through fog. When she opened them, her decision was made. She tore the letter in half, then again, until the paper was nothing but shreds. The next morning, she pinned a notice on the bulletin board beside the hateful posters. It was handwritten, simple, clear, Confidence and Care Club, learn to stand tall. That afternoon, a handful of curious students showed up in an unused classroom. Maya, Jamal, 2 shy freshmen, and a tall boy with bruises on his arm. Alicia greeted them with a calm smile. This isn't a club about fighting, she said, writing on the board. It's about knowing your worth. About learning to protect it. The chalk squeaked as she wrote each word carefully. At the top of the board she drew a line, and beneath it, she wrote, kindness is not weakness. The students read it in silence. Maya whispered, that's what you said in the cafeteria. Alicia nodded. And I meant it. The session began with breathing exercises, small lessons about balance, focus, how to say no without fear. It wasn't just self-defense, it was rebuilding something Milstone had forgotten. For the first time in days, Alicia felt the weight in her chest lift, even just a little. After the students left, she stood alone in the classroom, the afternoon sun filtering through the blinds, dust swirling in the golden light. Outside, laughter echoed in the hallway, lighter, freer. She allowed herself a small smile. But elsewhere in the building, in the boardroom lined with plaques and portraits, the air was colder. Mr. Whitmore sat at the head of the table, scrolling through his tablet. An email notification flashed on the screen, hearing scheduled, Friday 9 a.m. He read it slowly, the corner of his mouth curling into a thin smile. Good, he murmured, closing the tablet with a snap. Let's end her career publicly. Around him, the other board members exchanged uneasy looks, but no one spoke. Outside, thunder rolled over the industrial skyline. At Milstone High, hope had been reborn, but so had something darker, patient and waiting. Friday morning dawned gray and heavy, as if even the sky hesitated to look down on Milstone High. By 7, the school's main auditorium was already overflowing. Wooden chairs scraped against the floor, cameras clicked, reporters whispered into microphones. A banner hung at the front of the stage, Milstone School Board Public Hearing. The air smelled of varnish, nerves, and coffee. Students lined the walls, whispering. Some came out of curiosity, others out of quiet defiance. In the front row, Cole sat stiffly beside his father, Mr. Whitmore, his jaw tight, the bruised pride of a boy forced into a man's war. When Alicia entered through the side door, the room fell into a tense hush. She wore a plain white blouse, her torn cardigan carefully stitched and pressed, a silent declaration that she refused to hide her wounds. The principal struck the gavel. This session is now open. Subject, the conduct of Ms. Alicia Johnson. Mr. Whitmore stood, buttoning his suit jacket with the ease of a man used to being obeyed. His voice carried like a sermon. Ladies and gentlemen, what we witnessed last week was not discipline. It was aggression. An adult using force against students. Murmurs rose from a section of parents nodding in agreement. If we tolerate this, he continued, our school becomes a place of violence, not learning. Ms. Johnson is a danger to our children. To my son. His tone sharpened on the last words. He gestured toward Alicia without looking at her. I demand her immediate termination. A few hands clapped hesitantly. But at the back, others frowned, whispering. The gavel struck again. Order. From the second row, a woman stood, Ms. Rivera, Alicia's lawyer, small, composed, her silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent light. If I may, she said. Before we condemn, perhaps we should see the truth unaltered. The screen behind her flickered to life. The uncut cafeteria video began to play. It showed everything, the mockery, the food thrown, the cardigan torn apart. The audio captured laughter, not screams. Then came Alicia's controlled movements, each one deliberate, precise, non-violent. When the throw ended, the silence on the screen mirrored the one in the room. For a long moment, no one breathed. The only sound was the ticking of the old clock above the exit door. Tick. 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 Ms. Rivera's voice broke the stillness. This is not violence. This is self-defense. Lawful, minimal, and restrained. Mr. Whitmore stood abruptly, his face flushed. This proves nothing. Anyone can edit a clip. What about the testimonies? The emails from parents? He snapped his fingers at the aide beside him, who hurried forward with a folder. Multiple complaints accuse her of inappropriate behavior with students. She hugs them, takes them aside, comforting crying children. Ms. Rivera interrupted smoothly, isn't a crime. But manipulating facts might be. The lawyer turned to the audience. Let's hear what the students themselves have to say. At that moment, a soft voice from the back said, I will. All eyes turned. Jamal stood up, clutching a small recorder. His hands trembled, but his voice did not. I have something you all need to hear. He pressed play. Static filled the room for a second, then a familiar voice echoed through the speakers, Cole's voice, confident and cruel. Whoever ruins her reputation gets paid. I don't care how. Just make it happen. A gasp tore through the auditorium. Cole's face drained of color. Mr. Whitmore spun toward him, eyes blazing. What did you do? Cole's lips parted, but no sound came out. Students whispered, parents stood, the press surged forward. Maya covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. He forced us, she cried out. He made us post the fake video. He said if we didn't, he'd ruin us too. The room erupted in chaos. Teachers stood, arguing. The gavel struck repeatedly. Order. Order. Alicia remained seated, her eyes calm, her breathing steady. She rose slowly, the sound of her heels clicking against the wood cutting through the noise. Enough, she said, her voice firm but quiet. The crowd fell still. She looked around the room, meeting eyes one by one, the frightened, the guilty, the ashamed. You can lie. You can twist. You can hide behind names and money. But truth, she said, pausing just long enough for the weight to settle, cannot be buried. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Ms. Rivera stepped forward, lifting a stack of printed metadata reports. We've traced the fake video to the Whitmore home network. The evidence is here. Gasps spread again. Mr. Whitmore's composure cracked for the first time. This is outrageous, he barked. You're fabricating lies against me. But the reporters were already filming, flashes bursting like lightning. The chairperson leaned toward the microphone, voice trembling slightly. Given the evidence presented, the board will convene privately to review all findings. Until then, Ms. Johnson is reinstated. Applause erupted, hesitant at first, then thunderous. Students rose to their feet, cheering. Maya rushed forward, hugging Alicia tightly, her tears wetting the repaired cardigan. You did it, she whispered. Alicia smiled faintly. No, she said, we did. At the far end of the room, Cole slumped in his chair, head bowed. For the first time, his bravado was gone. Around him, the power his father had built began to crumble. The press surrounded Rivera, microphones thrust forward, flashes bouncing off the screen where Alicia's calm face was still frozen mid-frame. The principal wiped his forehead, relief mingled with awe. The gavel struck one last time. Session adjourned. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Alicia stood near the doorway, watching the sunlight spill through the high windows. The weight that had pressed on her for weeks began to lift. Outside, voices cheered her name. For the first time since she'd arrived at Milstone, she felt seen for who she truly was. Then, as she reached for her phone to turn it off, the screen lit up with a new message. No name. No number. Just words. You think it's over? Her fingers hesitated over the glass. The cheers from the hall sounded distant now, fading under the hum of uncertainty. She locked the screen, slipped the phone into her pocket, and stepped into the corridor. The applause followed her down the hallway, echoing off the walls, but beneath it, something darker stirred, a promise that the storm she had weathered was not yet done. The gym smelled faintly of polish and chalk that night, its high windows glowing gold under the last slant of sunset. Folding mats were spread across the floor, and a half-circle of students stood waiting. Alicia stood at the center, hands clasped behind her back, her voice steady, calm, echoing softly through the vast room. If you can breathe, you can think. If you can think, you can survive. She watched as Maya and Jamal mirrored her breathing, slow and even, the nervousness in their faces easing. Around them, laughter was hesitant but genuine. It was the first meeting of the Confidence and Care Club, and though only a dozen students had shown up, Alicia felt the warmth of something real beginning. The gym lights flickered slightly overhead, humming in rhythm with the night outside. Strength isn't in your fists, she continued. It's in what you choose not to do. Her words seemed to float in the space between them. Then, without warning, the lights cut out completely. The sudden darkness swallowed everything. Someone gasped. The ceiling fans stopped spinning. A metallic clang echoed from the door, the unmistakable sound of a lock sliding shut. The students froze. Ms. Johnson. Maya's voice trembled. Stay calm, Alicia said instantly, her voice low but firm. Everyone take a breath. Stay where you are. A faint chuckle came from outside the gym. Then another. The small glass window on the door glowed with the flicker of a phone flashlight. Shadows moved behind it. Welcome to rehearsal, a boy's voice sneered. It was Tyler. Another voice followed, mocking and sharp. Smile for the camera. Brett. The sound of recording apps clicking filled the silence. Alicia's heart pounded once, then steadied. Form a circle, she said softly. Backs to each other. Eyes outward. Breathe. The students obeyed, their shoes scuffing against the mats. The door rattled again. Open up. Maya shouted, panic rising. Alicia touched her shoulder. Not yet. Let them talk. We don't feed fear by screaming. Outside, the laughter grew louder. Come on, teach, Brett taunted. Show us how brave you really are. A flashlight beam darted through the small window, cutting across the dark room. It landed on Alicia's face. She didn't flinch. Instead, she took a step toward the door, her calm more unnerving than anger. You're endangering everyone here, she said. Put the phones down and walk away. Tyler pushed the door open just an inch, enough to slip in the phone, recording. Perfect, he whispered. Then he reached forward, grabbing Maya's arm. Before anyone could react, Alicia moved. A clean pivot, a twist of her body, the same discipline she had preached. She caught his wrist, redirected the force, and lowered him safely to the ground, her knee pinning his arm just enough to hold him still without harm. Brett stumbled backward, phone shaking in his hands, still filming. Keep rolling, he hissed. But Jamal lunged forward, snatching the phone and switching it off. Enough, he said, voice trembling but fierce. We're not afraid anymore. The words hung in the darkness like a spark. From outside came the distant wail of sirens. Red and blue lights flashed through the window, scattering across the mats. Police. Open up, someone shouted. The door burst open as officers stormed in, flashlight slicing through the dark. Alicia immediately released Tyler and raised both palms. They locked the door, Maya cried out. They were filming to frame her. One of the officers grabbed the fallen phone, scrolling through messages. On the screen glowed the group chat, lock the door. Get footage. Make her snap. The proof was undeniable. Brett was pulled up by the collar, mumbling, "It wasn't my idea." Tyler stared at the floor, face pale. Through the open window, a figure stood outside, Cole. He didn't move, didn't speak. His eyes met Alicia's across the distance, the cold glass between them reflecting the police lights. For a brief second, his expression faltered, anger twisted into something like confusion, regret, maybe even fear. Then he turned and walked away into the shadows. The students gathered around Alicia, voices shaky but relieved. "You saved us," Maya whispered. Alicia shook her head gently. "No," she said, her tone soft but unyielding. "You saved yourselves. You listened. You stayed calm. That's what courage is." The officers escorted the boys away, their radios crackling. The lights flickered back on, flooding the room in harsh brightness. Alicia looked down at the scuffed mats, the scattered notebooks, the trembling hands that had just learned what strength truly meant. Her cardigan sleeve brushed against her wrist, the stitches rough against her skin. It reminded her that pain could be mended, that broken things could still hold. As the last siren faded into the night, she exhaled deeply. Outside the gym, the world was already moving again, but inside, she knew something irreversible had happened. Her lesson had become her reality. And somewhere beyond the parking lot lights, Cole Whitmore stood alone, staring back at the school he no longer controlled, the sound of his own footsteps echoing into the dark. The auditorium shimmered in golden light that afternoon, sunlight pouring through the tall windows, glinting off rows of polished trophies. Every seat was taken. Students, teachers, and parents filled the room, their whispers soft, expectant. At the center of the stage stood a glass display case draped in white cloth. The principal stepped up to the microphone, voice steady with pride. "Today," he said, "we don't just end a school year. We begin a new chapter." He turned toward Alicia Johnson, who stood at the side of the stage, her repaired cardigan draped elegantly over her shoulders. "Ms. Johnson," he said, "please join us." Applause thundered as she walked forward. She reached out, pulled away the cloth, and revealed what now rested inside the glass case. The torn navy cardigan, stitched, cleaned, preserved, folded neatly under a plaque that read, "The torn cardigan, a symbol of strength." The room went quiet. Alicia looked out across the faces before her. Students who had once whispered behind her back now met her gaze with respect. Maya sat in the front row, clutching Jamal's hand. Cole sat a few rows away, shoulders square but eyes lowered. Alicia leaned toward the microphone. "The tear," she said softly, "didn't break me. It reminded me why I teach." The words were simple, but they carried through the hall like music. She paused, letting the silence breathe. We all face moments when cruelty tries to define us. But kindness is not weakness. It's the strength that survives after everything else has fallen apart. Her voice trembled slightly at the end, not with fear, but with truth. The audience rose to their feet in applause, a wave of sound that filled every corner of the hall. Maya wiped her eyes. Jamal smiled through tears. Then, from the middle row, a chair scraped back. Cole stood. His hands shook as he gripped the edge of his seat. "Ms. Johnson," he began, voice breaking, "I'm sorry." The room fell silent again. "I hurt people. I lied. I thought power meant being feared. But you showed me that real strength is something else." Tears rolled down his cheeks. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to change." Alicia stepped toward him, her eyes kind but firm. "An apology is the first step," she said. What matters is what you do next. He nodded, swallowing hard, and the crowd erupted once more. Applause, louder this time, not just for her, but for him, for the idea that even those who fell could rise again. Maya leaned against Jamal's shoulder, whispering, "We did it." Outside, the school courtyard was alive with laughter and sunlight. The banners fluttered above the gym entrance, children ran across the grass. Hope, fragile but real, filled the air. Yet beyond the fence, on the quiet road that led away from Milstone High, a black car sat idling beneath a line of bare trees. Inside, Mr. Whitmore watched the celebration through the windshield, his face half hidden in shadow. The applause from the hall carried faintly on the wind. He smirked, eyes cold. "They think this is over," he murmured, his voice low, almost to himself. "It's only the beginning." He started the engine, the sound swallowed by the cheers echoing from the auditorium. Inside, under the golden light, the torn cardigan gleamed like a relic of survival. The students of Milstone High stood taller than before, their voices united. The storm had passed, but somewhere in the distance, thunder still lingered, promising that the fight for truth never really ends. If you enjoyed this story, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories.